They said I was nobody, just another accountant who should keep her head down and follow orders. But when I found those hidden files, millions stolen, families destroyed, I had a choice. Stay silent and keep my job or speak up and lose everything. I chose the truth. They crushed me, blacklisted me, laughed as I walked out with nothing but a cardboard box and a shattered reputation. But what they didn't know was that I had made copies. What they didn't see was the fire they lit inside me. And what they never imagined was that 5 years later, I would be sitting in the office that used to be my boss's, not because I destroyed him, though karma did that just fine, but because I built something bigger, something honest, something mine. This is the story of how I lost everything by doing the right thing and gained everything by refusing to give up. I never thought of myself as brave. I was just someone who liked numbers to add up. My name is Sarah Chen, and for 7 years I worked as a senior accountant at Grafton Industries, a mid-sized construction firm in the city. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't exciting, but it was stable, and stability was something I had learned to value after growing up watching my parents struggle to make ends meet. Every morning, I would arrive at the office at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying my coffee in one hand and my worn leather bag in the other. I had a small desk near the window on the third floor. The view wasn't much, just the parking lot and a slice of sky, but it was mine. My coworkers were friendly enough. We would chat about weekend plans and complain about the coffee machine. My boss, Richard Grafton, was the son of the company's founder. He was charming in that polished, corporate way. He wore expensive suits and always remembered your name. People liked him. I liked him too, at first. He seemed like someone who genuinely cared about the company his father had built, but I had always been someone who paid attention to details. It started small. A receipt that didn't match an invoice, an expense report with a suspicious round number. At first, I thought it was just sloppy bookkeeping. I would fix the error, make a note, and move on. But then I started noticing patterns. Money was being moved around in ways that didn't make sense. Payments to vendors I had never heard of, contracts that seemed inflated. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I just didn't understand how things worked at the executive level. But the numbers kept nagging at me. Numbers don't lie. That's what my father always said. He was a math teacher, and he taught me that if something doesn't add up, there's a reason. So I started digging, just a little. I would stay late after everyone else had gone home, pulling up old records, cross-referencing accounts. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I just wanted to understand. I wanted the numbers to make sense again. And then, one Thursday evening in late September, I found it. I was going through the files for a project we had completed 2 years earlier, a public housing development funded by the city. The budget had been $30 million. But as I traced the payments, I realized that nearly $8 million of that had been funneled through shell companies, fake vendors, inflated invoices. The money had been siphoned off piece by piece and no one had noticed, or if they had chosen to look the other way. My hands were shaking as I stared at the screen. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate, this was fraud. And it wasn't just Richard. The trail led to several other senior executives, including the CFO and 2 board members. I sat there in the dim light of my desk lamp, feeling the weight of what I had discovered pressing down on my chest. I should have closed the file. I should have walked away. But I couldn't. Those housing units were supposed to be for low-income families, people who needed safe, affordable places to live, and someone had stolen from them. I made copies of everything. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I couldn't let this disappear. I saved the files onto a USB drive and slipped it into my purse. Then I shut down my computer, turned off the lamp, and went home. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about my parents, about the cramped apartment we lived in when I was a kid because that was all they could afford. I thought about the families who had been waiting for those housing units, who had been promised something better. I thought about right and wrong, and how sometimes the line between them is so clear that you can't pretend not to see it. By morning, I had made my decision. I was going to report it. I spent the weekend rehearsing what I would say. I wasn't sure who to go to first. Reporting it internally felt dangerous. After all, the people involved were at the top of the company. But going straight to the authorities felt extreme, like I was skipping steps. I decided to start with human resources. Maybe there was a protocol for this kind of thing. Maybe they could guide me. On Monday morning, I requested a meeting with Linda Cartwright, the head of HR. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a reputation for being fair. I trusted her, or at least I wanted to. We met in a small conference room. I laid out what I had found, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. I showed her the documents, explained the trail of money, pointed out the discrepancies. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each page I turned. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then she closed the folder and looked at me with something that might have been pity. She said she would look into it. She said I had done the right thing by bringing it to her attention. She said I should keep this confidential while they conducted an internal investigation. I nodded. I felt relieved. I had done my part. Surely, the company would handle it from here. But that relief didn't last long. 2 days later, I was called into Richard Grafton's office. He was sitting behind his massive oak desk, and he wasn't smiling. He asked me to close the door. He told me that he had heard about my concerns. He said he appreciated my diligence, but that I had misunderstood the situation. Those payments, he explained, were legitimate. The vendors were subcontractors. The contracts were complex, and it was easy for someone without experience in executive finance to get confused. He said it kindly, but there was steel underneath his words. He suggested that I focus on my own responsibilities and leave the higher-level accounting to the people who understood it. I wanted to argue. I wanted to show him that I wasn't confused, that I knew exactly what I had seen. But something in his eyes stopped me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a warning. I left his office feeling cold. Over the next few weeks, things began to change. My access to certain files was restricted. I was reassigned to smaller, less important projects. Colleagues who used to chat with me in the break room suddenly seemed busy whenever I walked in. I could feel the walls closing in. Then, in late October, I was called into another meeting. This time, it was with Richard and the CFO, Martin Hale. They told me that due to budget cuts, my position was being eliminated. They offered me a severance package, 3 months' salary, and a glowing reference letter, provided I signed a non-disclosure agreement. The NDA was broad. It prohibited me from discussing anything related to the company's finances, operations, or internal matters. I read it twice. This was how they were going to bury it. If I signed, I would be silenced. If I didn't, I would be fired without severance, and they would make sure I never worked in this industry again. I thought about my rent, my student loans, my mother's medical bills. I thought about how hard it would be to find another job without a reference. But I also thought about those families, about the $8 million that had been stolen, about the fact that if I stayed silent, no one would ever know. I didn't sign. I told them I needed time to think about it. That was a mistake. By the end of the week, I was escorted out of the building by security. No severance, no reference, just a cardboard box with my desk plant and a framed photo of my parents, and a reputation that had been quietly shredded. Within a month, I learned that word had spread. I was labeled as difficult, unreliable, someone who made baseless accusations against her employer. I applied to dozens of firms. I had interviews, and they seemed to go well until they didn't. I would get a polite email thanking me for my time, saying they had decided to go in a different direction. I knew what was happening. I had been blacklisted. By January, my savings were running out. I was living off credit cards and instant noodles. I felt ashamed, angry, scared. I had done the right thing, and it had cost me everything. There were days when I didn't want to get out of bed. Days when I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. Maybe I should have just kept my head down. Maybe I should have signed that NDA and moved on. But every time I thought about giving up, I would remember why I had spoken up in the first place, and I would force myself to keep going. Since no one would hire me, I decided to hire myself. I started offering freelance bookkeeping and accounting services. I posted ads online, reached out to small business owners, offered my services at rates I knew were too low. At first, no one responded, but then slowly I started getting clients. A small cafe that needed help organizing their receipts, a freelance graphic designer who was drowning in invoices, a nonprofit that couldn't afford a full-time accountant. They were small jobs. The pay was barely enough to cover rent, but it was something. And more importantly, it was honest work. I threw myself into it. I was meticulous, reliable, and kind. I answered emails at midnight. I explained things in plain language. I genuinely cared about helping these people succeed. Word started to spread not through corporate networks but through the quiet recommendations of people I had helped. One client told another. That client told two more. Slowly, my calendar started to fill. I rented a tiny office space above a laundromat. It smelled like detergent, and the heat didn't always work, but it was mine. I named my business Clearview Accounting. The name felt right, honest, transparent, clear. Everything that Grafton Industries wasn't. As my client base grew, I realized I couldn't do it all alone. I hired my first employee, a recent college graduate named Jenny who reminded me of myself at that age, hungry, hardworking, and careful with numbers. Then I hired another, and another. We worked long hours, but there was something different about it. We weren't just chasing profit. We were building something that mattered. I made a promise to myself and to my team: we would never cut corners. We would never lie to a client. We would never look the other way when something didn't add up. Integrity wasn't just a word on our website. It was the foundation of everything we did, and people noticed. By the end of the second year, we had outgrown the office above the laundromat. We moved into a real space downtown, with windows that actually opened and a coffee machine that worked. By the third year, we were managing accounts for mid-sized companies. By the fourth year, we had a reputation as one of the most trustworthy accounting firms in the city. But through it all, I never forgot what had happened at Grafton Industries. I still had those files. I had kept them safe, locked in a drawer, wondering if there would ever be a time when they mattered again. That time came sooner than I expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early spring when I got the call. A woman's voice, calm and professional, introduced herself as Agent Lisa Mendoza from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She said she was investigating financial irregularities at Grafton Industries, and my name had come up in connection with a prior internal complaint. My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I asked her how she had found me. She said that a whistleblower hotline had recently received an anonymous tip about the housing project fraud. When they started digging, they found records of my termination and the circumstances around it. They wanted to know if I had any information that could help their investigation. I told her I did. We met the next day at a cafe near my office. Agent Mendoza was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I brought the USB drive. I had kept it all these years, not because I was waiting for revenge, but because I couldn't bring myself to destroy the evidence. I handed it to her and walked her through everything I had found 5 years earlier. She listened carefully, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she looked at me with something close to respect. She said that what I had done, both then and now, took courage. She said a lot of people would have destroyed the evidence or pretended it never existed. The investigation took months. I wasn't involved in the day-to-day process, but Agent Mendoza kept me updated. They were building a case, she said. It was complicated, but they had enough to move forward. Then one morning I saw the headline: Executives at Grafton Industries indicted on fraud and embezzlement charges. Richard Grafton, Martin Hale, and 3 others were facing federal charges. The article detailed the scheme, the shell companies, the inflated contracts, the stolen millions. It even mentioned the housing project, the one that had started it all. I sat at my desk and read the article 3 times. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, vindication, sadness. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. A few weeks later, I received a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They thanked me for my cooperation and informed me that I was eligible for a whistleblower award under federal law. A percentage of the recovered funds would be awarded to individuals who provided critical information. I didn't know how much it would be, and honestly, I didn't care. That had never been the point. But when the check arrived 6 months later, it was enough to change my life, enough to pay off my debts, enough to expand my business, enough to finally breathe. I didn't spend it on anything extravagant. I invested it back into Clearview accounting. I hired more staff. I opened a second office. I started a scholarship fund for students studying accounting, especially those from low-income families. I wanted to turn something painful into something good. 5 years after that check arrived, I found myself standing in front of a building I never thought I would see again. Grafton Industries had collapsed after the scandal. The company went bankrupt, the assets were liquidated, and the office building was sold. The new owner had converted it into a co-working space, and my company, Clearview Accounting, had just signed a lease for the entire third floor, the same floor where I used to sit at my small desk by the window. I walked through the space with my team. It looked different now, modern, open, full of light, but I recognized the bones of it. I stood by the window, looking out at the same parking lot, the same slice of sky. Jenny came up beside me. She had been with me since the beginning, and now she was my partner. She asked me if it felt strange to be back. I told her it did, but it also felt right. This place had once represented everything that was wrong with corporate greed and corruption. Now it was going to be a space where we built something honest, where we treated people fairly, where we proved that you didn't have to cheat to succeed. I thought about the woman I had been 10 years earlier, the one who was so scared to speak up, the one who lost everything because she did. I wished I could go back and tell her that it would be okay, that the pain wouldn't last forever, that doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, is still worth it. I don't regret what I did. Not for a single moment. Yes, it was hard. Yes, I lost years of my life to fear and struggle, but I also gained something I never would have found if I had stayed silent. I gained my integrity. I gained the knowledge that I could survive the worst and still come out stronger. I gained a business built on truth and a team that believed in the same things I did. And maybe most importantly, I gained peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you did what you could with what you had, that you didn't look away, that you stood up, even when you were standing alone. A few months after we moved into the new office, I received an email from someone I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "Thank you." I opened it, curious. It was from a woman named Maria Gonzalez. She said she had lived in one of the housing units that was finally completed after the funds were recovered and the project was properly managed. She said she and her 2 kids had been living in a shelter before that. She said the apartment had changed their lives. She didn't know who I was or what I had done, but she had read about the case and wanted to thank everyone who had been involved in making sure the project was finished the right way. I read that email 3 times and I cried, because that was why I had done it. Not for recognition, not for money, not even for justice, really. I did it because behind every number in those files was a person, a family, a life, and they mattered. Today, Clearview Accounting is one of the most respected firms in the region. We have over 50 employees, and we work with everyone from small nonprofits to large corporations. People trust us because we have earned that trust, one honest decision at a time. I still think about Richard Grafton sometimes. I heard he served 3 years in federal prison and was released on parole. I don't know what he's doing now, and I don't wish him harm. I hope he learned something. I hope he understands the weight of what he did, but that's not my burden to carry anymore. I also think about the person I used to be, the one who was afraid, the one who almost stayed silent. And I'm grateful to her, because she found the courage to do something hard, even when no one was watching, even when it felt impossible. If I could leave you with one lesson from all of this, it would be this: the right thing is not always the easy thing. In fact, it's usually the hardest thing. But doing it, standing up, speaking out, holding on to your integrity even when the world punishes you for it, that is what builds a life you can be proud of. Not a perfect life, not an easy life, but an honest one. And in the end, that's the only kind of life worth living. I am Sarah Chen. I exposed corruption, lost everything, and built an empire from the ashes. But more than that, I built a life I can look at in the mirror and feel proud of. And that, more than any office or any amount of money, is the real victory.